Good afternoon, everyone. Dear teachers, welcome to today's webinar. I'm Katia Valley, Schools and Exams Marketing Manager, and I'm talking to you from our office in São Paulo, Cambridge, Brazil's office. What about you? Where are you joining from? Use the chat to send us this information. Oh, Pernambuco present, Petrópolis, hello, Daniela. Hello, Carla. Thanks for having you back. Campinas, Rio Grande do Sul. Wonderful to see so many of you from all over Brazil. São Bernardo, Florianópolis. Great. Welcome. This week, as you know, we have been running a series of webinars. In fact, we've been running webinars since September. And if we go to the next slide, for those of you who are here for the first time, on the left, you have a QR code that leads you to Cambridge Brazil YouTube channel, where you will find all the recordings, all the webinar recordings. And tomorrow, we are going to have our last webinar of this series. So on the right, the QR code on the right, you have information to enroll for tomorrow's webinar with Herbert Porta. I invite you to follow us on social media. We are on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And before we begin, a little bit of housekeeping. At the end of this presentation, we will have time for questions. Please use the Q&A tool. At the end of the presentation, in the chat box, you will see a link for feedback. And from the feedback form, you will get access to download your certificate. As I told you, all these webinars are being recorded, and the recording will be uploaded soon in our Cambridge Brazil YouTube channel. Today, we have the honor and the privilege of having Viviane Kirmeliene with us. Viviane has been working in the ELT field since 1994. She's a teacher trainer, ELT editor, and materials writer. She holds a BA in English from the University of São Paulo, C2 Proficiency, and ICELT. As an editor and writer, she has worked on a wide range of primary and secondary series for publishers in Brazil and abroad. She's one of the authors of Global Changer, a series for teenage learners. She's interested in creating materials that engage children and teens and foster critical thinking. Welcome, Vivi, and thank you very much for accepting our webinar invitation. So good to have you back.
Oh, thank you, Katia. It's great to be here again with you and the Cambridge team and all the teachers. So today I'm here to talk about speaking skills because this is a huge challenge for teachers who work with large classes, work with teenagers in the Brazilian context. But I'm pretty sure that most of what we will discuss here today will be useful for every teacher who works with teenagers in different contexts, in language schools, for example. So I think everyone will be able to leave this session with valuable and practical tips. So let's move on. So welcome, everyone. I'm glad to see that we have people from all over Brazil. Maybe we have people from other countries as well. It's always very nice to be here with you. And our agenda for today is, well, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about me. You know, Katia had this wonderful presentation. I'll just add some more things, but it'll be quite brief. Then we're going to discuss, I'm going to share with you some of the challenges that I have identified as the challenges that we have when we work with speaking tasks with teens in large mixed ability classes, which is, you know, the context that we have in Brazilian schools, in regular schools. Then we will briefly look into the BNCC, which is the Brazilian document for education. We're going to talk a little bit about it and how it sees the work with the speaking skills in English. Then finally, we'll get to the practical ideas and tips I think I know this is everyone's favorite part. Then more general tips and advice, a final reminder, and then our questions and answers. So, as Katja said, I'm Viviane. I'm one of the authors of Global Changer. I'm the mother of two girls. One is 6, the other one is 11. They're a great source of inspiration for everything I do, all the materials that I write. I've been in ELT since 1994, almost 30 years. Now I'm an editor and writer. And I just love ELT materials, and think about how we can create materials that are more engaging, diverse, and materials that can better reflect our students' reality and realities, actually. So as I mentioned, our target audience in terms of students today, I'll be talking about teenagers who study English, who learn English in large classes. So I'm talking about 25, 30, 35 students many times. You know, this is our focus. They are in a monolingual context, so all the students share the same mother tongue, the same L1. And I'm talking about mixed ability groups. So we have students with different levels of proficiency in the same class. You have students who only study English at their regular schools. You have students who go to a language school, you know, in the mornings or in the afternoons. So teachers have this additional challenge of balancing these interests and different skills and language levels of language proficiency. So let's take a look at these challenges. I looked back to my experience as a teacher. I was in the classroom for many, many years, and I worked, most of these years, I worked with teenagers. So I looked back at these challenges, the challenges I had, and I also talked to teachers to check what they identified as challenges. So here are some ideas, some things that teachers say, some things that I said when I was a teacher. So first, students don't want to speak English in class. You know, they want, every time I try to set a speaking task, they speak their mother tongue. They speak L1. Here in Brazil, they speak Portuguese all the time. So this is one challenge that teachers face. Another challenge, another thing that teachers usually say, they complain about. Well, organizing and managing speaking skills, they take too long. It's a lot of work in large classes, and I simply don't have time in my schedule for that. I have to work with grammar, I have to work with vocabulary, I have to deal with other demands from the school. There is Festa Junina, there is Feira de Ciências, all these other events. I simply cannot, I don't have time for speaking. Okay, so this is another challenge. Then we have, well, every time I try to work with a speaking activity, it's complete chaos, you know? Speaking activities are chaotic, the students don't focus, they simply don't accomplish the task. Another challenge, you know, the speaking activities in the course book I use are too difficult. The students simply cannot do them, you know, they cannot deal with these activities, they're too difficult, too complex for them. And finally, the fifth challenge, and then here I use the quotation marks here because actually this is not, it's strong versus weak students. This is not something I like to use, but you know, I decided to choose these words because this is something, these terms, everyone would understand what I meant. So my strong students, you know, quotation marks, my air quotes are here. My strong students feel frustrated in speaking activities because I need to lower the challenge to meet the needs of the weaker, you know, again, air quotes, the weaker ones. Okay, so these are 5 challenges that I have identified from my experience, from the opportunities I had to talk to teachers. And now I need your help. Okay, please get your cell phones, or you can also copy the address. You can go to menti.com if you're on a PC and just type this quote. The quote is 8762-8159. Or you can use your phone to read the QR code that we have here on the right, on the corner here, right? So I need your help. I'd like you to select select the most challenging challenge, let's say, the most difficult challenge, So do you remember what the teacher said? So one is students speak at one, they speak Portuguese or they speak their mother tongue all the time. Two, it takes too long to organize and manage speaking activities. The third challenge, students simply don't focus, they don't pay attention. Four, the tasks, the activities in the course book are too difficult, the speaking activities. And five, I cannot offer challenge for the strong students. Okay, so please go to menti.com, use the code and choose your challenge, the challenge that you face in your classes when you have to work with speaking, or a challenge that you have faced. If you work with adults, think of your context, okay? So just take your time. We're going to see the results in a few seconds. Ooh, okay, so we have started looking at the results. Students speak at one is a big one. Anyone else? Do we have more people answering? If you don't want to use Menti, you can type your answer in the chat. You can just type the number 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. If you cannot use Menti or you don't want to, just type your answer. Okay. Yes, so students speak at one is the biggest challenge here. Yes, I agree with you. When I was a teacher, this was the biggest challenge for me, and I had like I had a whole set of strategies that I used to encourage my students to speak English in class. So let's take a look at that. Let me get back to the presentation. But before we talk about these challenges and before we talk about tips, things we can do to overcome this challenge, let's take a look at the official document, okay? What does the official Brazilian document say about working with speaking in classes? And this document is the famous Base Nacional Comum Curricular, or BNCC, okay? And I think this is a document, it's important that everyone who works in regular schools, everyone who works in a regular school must be familiar with the English part of this document, the English section. So what is it? In case you're not familiar with the BNCC, let's take a look and check what it is. So this document states all the essential learnings that Brazilian students should acquire during Educação Básica, the 12 years of basic education in Brazil. So from first grade to the end of Ensino Médio, to the end of high school, everything students are supposed to learn is defined in the BNCC. But look at that. We're talking about the essential learnings. So is it the curriculum that we have to follow? Not exactly. The BNCC is not the curriculum, because from this document, the state and city governments and even schools, they should use it as the starting point for their curricula. So as we see, we're talking about essential learnings. The name of the document is is Base, so this is the beginning. So this is the essential thing that every student should have. A student who is in Acre, or a student who is in Rio de Janeiro, or a student who is in the countryside of Rio Grande do Sul, for example, they should all acquire the same knowledge, the same basic knowledge. But from that, I can do, many different things. I can states can attend to their local demands, cities, and even schools, they can develop their own curriculum. Okay, so it's not the curriculum. This is an important point. This is something I always say about the BNCC. And then we have for middle school, which is Ensino Fundamental Anos Finais, the old Ensino Fundamental 2, we have very specific guidelines for English, okay? And then these guidelines are divided into objetos do conhecimento and skills, and we have the competencies. We're not going to discuss this right now in this session, but let's take a look at the listening and speaking. I call it listening, speaking axis, which in Portuguese is eixo oralidade. I call it listening, speaking. So let's take a look at that. Let's see what the document says about speaking and listening skills. So here I translated these from the document, okay? And then we have, it says that involves language practices in situations of oral use of the language. There's a focus on understanding, which is listening, and oral production, which is speaking. And then I highlighted this part here about the articulation by negotiating the construction of meanings. This is very important because we're talking about interaction here, right? Another interesting point, there is this concern about the development of a series of behaviors and attitudes. And here's some examples. What are these behaviors and attitudes of the speakers? Taking risks, making oneself understood, giving voice to others, understanding and accepting others' perspectives, overcoming misunderstandings, and dealing with insecurity. So all these things should happen in the classroom when we're working with speaking and listening, right? So this is the introduction to the speaking and listening axis. Then when we look at, I got this print from the document itself. This is for the 6th grade, which is middle school here in Brazil, Ensino Fundamental Anos Finais, right? And here we have what we call unidades temáticas, then objetos de conhecimento, habilidades, right? As you can see, it's the speaking and listening axis, right? And we have two areas, two unidades temáticas that have to do with speaking. One is interação discursiva, which is the discourse interaction. They're talking about how we behave as speakers in a certain context. And in this case, the context is the classroom. So if you look at those objetos de conhecimento, we have the building of affection and social and social interaction, how we use the language in the classroom language. So this is the discourse interaction. And then we have those habilidades, we have the skills. And we have speaking itself, you know, what the so-called produção oral over there, right? And then for each year, we're going to have different objectives and different skills to be developed, okay? So this is the BNCC. So you see that speaking plays an important role here. You know, if you compare those that are a bit older, people that are not so young, those who started teaching in the 1990s might remember Parâmetros Curriculares Nacionais, right? The famous PCNs or PCNs, right? And when we went to the English language section in the PCNs, the main focus was on reading. Okay, we have to work on the reading skills. We have to develop the reading skill. And when we go to BNCC, you know, we have different skills having the same weight, the same importance. Okay, now moving on. Another document I always talk about the life skills and the competencies framework from Cambridge, because I think this document is wonderful, and we have for different areas. So we have this booklet about communication. You can find it online. I'm going to share with you a QR code that, you know, you can use this QR code to access and download this booklet. So it's fantastic. And we have this one, this focus on communication here. There's a booklet just about communication, because, you know, as it states here, it's an essential professional life skills, because it enables people to share information and ideas, express feelings and arguments. It's important to master effective communication. It's not only mastering grammar, vocabulary, and pronunciation. There are other things that we have to develop to have effective communication. And we can see that in the core areas here. Yeah, so when we have the Cambridge Life Competencies Framework, it is divided into 3 core areas. Using appropriate language and register for context. So should I talk, when you think of our students, should I talk to my teacher in the same way I talk to my classmates or to another person, for example? What we can do to facilitate interactions. So nonverbal language, for example, can help to facilitate interactions. How can I participate with appropriate confidence and clarity in speaking interactions? So these are the core areas of the life skills of the communication skill according to the life competencies framework. Here I have some examples. We won't have time to explore them, but here's some examples of can-do statements, how these core areas can be turned into action in the classroom. Okay, so this is for secondary, this is for our Ensino Fundamental Anos Finais and also Ensino Médio. So here we have some examples, these examples from the booklet. And this is an incredible resource that can help you create your speaking syllabus, right? Say, if you are interested in having a speaking syllabus, how am I going to develop the speaking skill in my classes with my students? I want to have this syllabus for the speaking skill. You can start with BNCC if you are in a Brazilian context, because then you know what the essential learnings are. You can use your course book and see what the speaking activities are, the speaking tasks, and how units and the sequences, the learning sequences deal with the speaking skill. And you can also resort to the Cambridge Life Competencies Framework. You can resort to the communication booklet for ideas of criteria and also things that you want your students to achieve. Okay. So here's the QR code and the link, okay? You can download the Cambridge Life Competencies Framework for free, okay? From these, you can either use the QR code or the address that we have here, the website. And for the BNCC, it's free. Just type BNCC, you're gonna find different websites where you can also download it from. So let's move on. Now, everyone's favorite part, the practical ideas and the practical tips. Yeah, because okay, it's interesting. I see the theory. I see that the speaking skill is important. I agree with you, but I have all those challenges. Remember those 5 challenges? And the participants, you identified the thing that students speak L1 all the time as the main challenge. Well, I have some other challenges for you, some other things that we have to keep in mind. Okay, I don't want to make things more complicated. Okay, bear with me. Yeah, so we have some things that we can do to facilitate actually the speaking skills, right? So I got this from a fantastic book that deals with mixed ability groups. You're going to find that in my references. And the first thing, we have here, well, students have to be familiar with the topic, because the more familiar they are with a topic, the easier it is for them to talk about it. So if you have a speaking task about, let's say, life in the North Pole, you have indigenous people who live in the north of Canada, these extreme temperatures. If students are not familiar with that, if they don't know anything about these indigenous people, they won't be able to talk about them. So this is something to keep in mind. So what could we do to help students become more familiar? Maybe show them a video about a day in the life of one of these, a child, for example, or a teenager their age who lives in these areas, in this area of the North Pole, for example. This could help them become more familiar with the topic, and then it would be easier for them to talk about it. Another point to consider is the length of the utterances. Yeah, the utterances are the things that we say. So the longer and more complex utterances are obviously more challenging, while when you have shorter and simple ones, they are easier to produce. So this is something to keep in mind when you were working with the speaking tasks. So if students have shorter questions and they have to give shorter answers, so at the beginning of the speaking practice, they will feel better and more comfortable when you have higher chances of a successful activity. Also, planning time, not planning for you, but planning for them, for the students. If you allow students time to plan what they're going to say, this will result in greater fluency and better accuracy. Also, rehearsal time. Rehearsal is directly connected with planning. If students have time to rehearse the task, if they do the task again and again and again, at the end, they'll be making fewer mistakes. They will be more fluent and they will be more confident about their speaking ability. And finally, we have to value and we have to consider the nonverbal features. I think this is so easy for Brazilians because we speak with our hands all the time, and we have this way of express our feelings using, facial expressions, our facial movements. So this helps us a lot. I mean, for Brazilians, this is not a problem. Okay, so these are things that we can do to facilitate. Now let's recap the challenges. Remember those 5 challenges? We're going to deal with each of them, and also we're going to see different ways to facilitate learning. We're going to see practical ways of facilitating learning based on the table that we have on the previous slide. So my first tip, planning. And here I'm not talking about planning, I mean students planning the speaking task, but teachers planning speaking tasks carefully. I know that we as teachers, we don't have time. We have a very busy schedule. But if you have to choose something that you need to plan, well, I don't have enough time to sit down and plan my whole unit carefully. If you have to choose sections to plan for careful planning, I would pick speaking, because there are different things going on in a speaking lesson or on a page in a course book dedicated to speaking, or when you decided to create your own materials and have your speaking tasks. So here we have one speaking lesson from Global Changer. This is level 1. This is unit 3. So we're talking about students who are in 6th or 7th grade in a regular school, or maybe 1st or 2nd level in a language school. So we're talking about beginners, right? And there's so much going on here on this page. It's not just a sequence of 6 activities. There's a lot going on. And there is this carefully graded practice. So some questions that we can ask ourselves when we're planning the lesson. What's the focus of these speaking tasks? When we look at the page, you can say, oh, it's easy. I noticed that. There's simple past here. I think those grammar lovers like me can easily identify that. But what's the focus? Is it just practicing the speaking, the simple past? So we have to ask ourselves this question. And what do we have before this page and after it? What came before? So here, if we have the simple past, did students have practice on the simple past before that? Was this practice relevant? Was this practice good enough to enable them to succeed in the speaking activity that is being proposed here? And then this has to do with this question. Do students have the language, not only the grammar, but do they have the grammar, the vocabulary, the functions to perform the task? Do I need to teach anything here? Do I need to review content here before I set the tasks? What are the steps? As I told you, we're going to see this page in detail. Everything here was carefully graded. Yeah, so what are the steps I have to identify as a teacher? Do my students, then think about your students, your class. Do my students need additional help? Do they need support or scaffolding? We'll be talking about scaffolding later in this session. Does anyone in my group need an extra challenge? Maybe the activity is too easy for some of my students. We have to plan for that too. We have to differentiate instruction. Now, and how will they work? How will my students work? Will they work individually, in pairs, in small groups? Because many times if you're working with a course book, the course book will tell you, look, this activity we believe should be done in pairs, but does this pattern of interaction work in my context? These are things you have to consider as well and make decisions. Sometimes say, oh, no, pair work here, this is not a good idea. I think I want my students to work in groups of 3. We're going to see that too, why groups of 3 is a good idea as well. And finally, the biggest challenge, what will I do to encourage my students to focus on the task and speak only in English? Okay, this was the biggest challenge that you have identified. Let's take a look at this speaking page in more detail, right? So it starts with a dialogue. We have a model dialogue here for students. So students have a model. This is one important thing we have to consider. There's a model here. And this model is also recorded on the page, right? So students can read and listen to these 2 students talking, interacting first as a model for their practice. After that, we have activities in which they will identify some interesting elements, some elements that we as authors chose to highlight. So here we're talking about, here we have 3 expressions that will add more, a more natural thing to the dialogue. So cool, hey, and what about you? So students have to complete this mini dialogue with these 3 expressions that hopefully they will use later in this speaking lesson. And then they're going to listen and repeat the expressions. Finally, the 4th activity is a pronunciation practice. We identified some compound nouns. So we thought it was important for students to identify the stress of the compound nouns related to the topic of the speaking lesson. Then they're going to listen to the model dialogue again and practice the dialogue with a partner. So this is highly controlled speaking practice, right? And finally, they're going to role play a new dialogue. So they have to change the words in blue in exercise 1. Let's get back to it. So this is exercise 1. They're going to replace the words in blue in this exercise with their own ideas. And then they're going to practice this dialogue with a partner, and then they're going to present this dialogue to the class. And finally, they're going to record this dialogue and upload it to the class digital portfolio. Okay, so this is how we can work with this. This is a speaking sequence in Global Changer, but I'm pretty sure that you're going to find this kind of sequence or something similar to this type of sequence in any other course book you're using, right? So you see how there are different things going on. It's not just a sequence of activities, how we started with a model dialogue and we kind of held students' hands, throughout the page. And then at the end, in activity 6, we say, okay, now you're ready to go. We let the hand go and say, you're ready to go. Now you work on your dialogue, okay? Now, that speaking activity was very clear because it was clearly signposted on the page. We have there speaking, it was obviously a speaking activity, but sometimes speaking activities are not so obvious. Okay, I got here another example from Global Changer. Every time we have language in context, which is grammar or vocabulary work, we finish the page with use it, and use it many times is a speaking task. So this is the kind of speaking task that is not clearly signposted, but your students will encounter it during your class. So you have to prepare for this also when you're planning your lesson, right? Oops. So this is something, we have these tricky things waiting for us, these pegadinhas, let's say, in course books. So we have to be ready for them as well, right? Now, the second tip, plan. Still talking about planning. My tip is to plan pair and group work. We have to plan it carefully. This will help overcome the challenge about students speaking L1 all the time, right? Because you have to make some decisions while you're planning your lessons. So, for example, you want students with the same language level, the same skills working together, or should these groups or pairs have students with different levels? We have pros and cons for each decision, and you have to weigh and consider things carefully while you were planning. I know that organizing students into pairs and groups is time consuming. It's a lot of trouble. It's much easier to say, you two, you two, you two, or you're A, you're B, you're A, you're B, you're A, you're B, or talk to the person next to you. It's much easier. And this is what we're going to do most of the time. But at least in speaking lessons, I highly recommend teachers think of the arrangements they have in class and make some different decisions and arrange students in different ways. Also, if you're talking about group work, do I need groups with the same size? Do we need groups with different sizes? And I think this is teachers' main concern. Do we want certain students to work together or not work together? You know, we have, for example, oh, you know, if Lucas and Mateus work together, they won't work. They won't speak. They will start talking about, I don't know, soccer or what their plans for the weekend are in L1, and my class will be complete chaos. You know, now, if Lucas works with Mariana and Mateus works with Guilherme, things will be calmer. I have more chances to succeed. Okay, so these are plans and decisions that we have to make while we are preparing our classes. It's very difficult to make these decisions while you're there, you know, in the heat of the moment. It's quite difficult to make these decisions at this moment, you know, so you have to kind of make of these decisions before your class. And consider threesomes. This is a piece of advice. Most of the time, when you look at speaking tasks that we have in course books, we're going to have pair work, students working in pairs. So we have student A, student B, they talk, the teacher monitors, and that's it. Now, you can have this third element, this third student in the pair, you know, and then the student can have different roles. The student can monitor students A and B, can help them, can be the timekeeper and say, guys, move on. Stop talking and concentrate on the task. If we're talking about higher levels, if we have a debate or if you have a discussion, the third element, this third student can be a fact checker. So something like this. Oh, so you're saying that there are penguins in the North Pole? That's not right. And then the fact checker can use, like, I don't know, on a smartphone or a tablet and say, no, you're wrong. We don't have penguins in the North Pole, for example, right? So this is something to consider. The third tip about the use of L1, and let's focus on the positive, about the use of English in our classes. Oops, what's this? Oops, something came up here. Sorry, guys. About the use of English in our classes. I think the first thing to consider is that we have to be the role model. So we have to do our best to speak to them in English all the time. I know it's difficult. I know it's tough. I know sometimes it's not really necessary, but I think we have to be the role model, you know, and try to speak English as much as possible, even when we meet them during break or between classes, you know, when we talk to them in English, I think they feel that you are this person, you are the model for the language. The second point, we have to make sure that students have what we call language for learning. I borrow this from CLIL. This is a concept from CLIL, from the methodology in which we have content-based lessons. But I think this is very important. So if you set a game, if students are going to play a board game, for example, do they have the language to play the board game? I mean, the language to negotiate meanings. Remember, BNCC? The language to negotiate meanings, the language to have these interactions. So things like, whose turn is it? Or, it's my turn. Or, who's going to roll the dice first? Oh, you won. Oh, I lost. Something like that. So this is language for learning. Do students have this language? Once they have this type of language, when they have to play, for example, a board game, as in this example I have given you, you're going to lower the chances of Portuguese, of L1 being used in classes. You know, something like this. Ai, é minha vez ou a sua? Quem vai agora, gente? Ai, cadê o dado? Vamos jogar o dado? So you see, you're going to have less less mother tongue, less L1 in your activities if students have language for learning. Another thing, and then this is going to kind of contradict what I just said. We cannot be like the L1 police and simply ban L1. We have to negotiate when and how it should be used. And then we can use different strategies for this type of negotiation. We can set contracts with the students. I worked a lot when I was in class with teenagers. I worked a lot with rewards. I used stars. I used rubber bands. I had this strategy that every student started the class with 3 colored rubber bands. I remember that they loved it. And they wanted to take the rubber bands home, but I said they had to return it at the end of the class. And then when someone spoke Portuguese in a moment that was not the moment for that, the student had to give the rubber band back to me. So sometimes, I had most of the class with the 3 rubber bands. Sometimes nobody had a rubber band at the end of the class. But this was a strategy that I used. Of course, that we have lots of discussions about using rewards and using strategies like this. But I think as teachers, we have to consider what works in our environments. And, for me, this strategy really worked. I got my students to speak a lot of English in class using strategies like rewards and the rubber bands, as I mentioned, or stars or other types of prizes like stickers or whatever. Yeah. So we cannot simply ban L1 and say no Portuguese allowed here, because then students will be so afraid of speaking that you might not get any language at all. Not Portuguese, not English, nothing at all. And this is not something that we want, right? And then we can use some simple indicators, signs, to show our students when they should and when they shouldn't speak in their mother tongue in class. And here, for example, here you have 2 examples. These signs, you can kind of create a sign like this and print. And, when it's time for a speaking task, you just show the English only sign. And then when the task is over and, if you're talking about a long class, sometimes students have 2-hour classes. I think it's a lot of time for a teenager to be in an English class, so you can have this 5 minutes of the Portuguese allowed moment. So these are signs that you can create, or you can use other strategies, or you can, I don't know, raise your right hand when they should only speak English, and then your left hand when Portuguese is allowed. I mean, you can use any kind of indicator that makes sense to you, right? So these are some ideas to help you overcome the challenge of having students speaking English in class. Of course, that the previous tips help a lot too, when you think of planning the speaking test carefully, planning how you're going to organize your students for the speaking task. They are also very important to avoid the use of L1 in speaking tasks. Then the 4th tip, helping our students become familiar with the topic. So here, and you're going to find, if you have the teacher's book, if you're working with a series and you have the teacher's book for that series, you're going to find most of your answers, most of the guidance actually, on how to help students become familiar with the topic in the teacher's book. But for example, in this speaking lesson from Global Changer 1, the one that you saw previously, we can ask questions about the picture, for example. Oh, what are the boys talking about? What do you think they're talking about? Yeah, it's difficult to know. What do you think they're talking about? What are some typical vacation activities? So here you can even brainstorm vocabulary, because they're going to need this vocabulary. If they haven't seen this vocabulary before of vacation activities, you can stop here and teach this vocabulary, or you can review this vocabulary, and even maybe some other language, even language from previous levels. Oh, so when people travel, how do they get to places? Do they travel by plane? Do they travel by car, by bus, I don't know. Okay, so here we have a chance. We help students become familiar with the topic, and we also have a chance to identify if you need to stop and review vocabulary, if there is emergent language. right? If there's new language here that is going to come up, and you can, write it on the board and leave this language there for students' reference, right? Tip number 5, and just have some water. Preparation time. And now it's preparation time for your students. They need time to prepare for the speaking tasks. You organize them into pairs, for example, and say, you two, now speak. This is not going to work well. So they need time to prepare, but they also need to focus, because if you simply say, okay, you two, to A, B, work together, read the instructions, and then do the speaking task, this is not preparation time either. I mean, this is not good preparation time, because they need to focus. So you can give them tasks during this preparation time. They can think, for example, of what they would like to say, or how they would like to say the things they want to say. Do they have all the language to express their ideas? So they can focus on these 2 areas. Many course books offer actual tasks for that. For example, here if you look at Global Changer, we have a task. Students have to first write 3 places in their notebook to talk about what they did on the previous weekend. So they have to stop and think about it and prepare for the task before they go to the following activity. Now they're going to work in pairs and guess. There's this guessing game about what they did on the previous weekend. Okay, so we have to offer preparation time, but good preparation time. Not only say, okay, read the instructions, or take your time, or go over the sentences. They have to focus. They must have clear focus on how they should spend this time. Another option is to work with mind maps. I'm a big fan of mind maps. Here, this is just an example. We have what I did last weekend, and then we have different cells and different possibilities, different ways students can develop this idea and get ready for the speaking task. Another tip, rehearsal time. Rehearsal time is actually practice. It's actually telling them, do it again and again and again. I mean, the speaking activity. And tell them it's fine. Say, look, you can stop, you can repeat. I'm here to help you. Or, the third element in the pair work can help, So it's, practice makes perfect. That's the saying, and it's absolutely right. And if they're, for example, working with a presentation, if it's an individual task and they have a presentation, for example, they have to talk about indigenous people from Alaska while showing them on a PowerPoint, for example. A nice tip is to ask them to record this rehearsal and then listen to it. This is something students can do at home. They can even do in the classroom. Most smartphones, I think all the smartphones nowadays have this recording feature. So students can record what they are planning to say. They can listen, and then they can, tweak pronunciation. They can work on some language they're not happy with. So this rehearsal time can happen even when we have individual work. And one important thing, students can help each other. We're talking about mixed ability classes here. So we're going to have the more knowledgeable peer. Remember Vygotsky? We're going to have the more knowledgeable peer who will be able to help other students. So take advantage of that as well. Now, scaffolding. Yeah, here I brought this picture because I wanted to make clear, this concept of the scaffold. It's so good. It's like having these platforms, and you can get higher and higher because we are on the platforms. So sometimes we have to build these platforms for our students in the speaking tasks. So imagine that you have this task. Work in pairs. Ask and answer about a real or imaginary trip. If you're talking about a regular group of students in this context that we discussed, if we just say, now go, it's going to be a complete disaster, right? So course books, they usually offer some kind of scaffolding. In this case here, another example from Global Changer, the same task. Look, work in pairs. Ask and answer questions 1 to 4 about a real or imaginary journey. So here we have prompts for the question. So where you go is where did you go, right? But maybe this scaffolding is not enough. Maybe you have students who need more help than that. And then, same task, we can like build the skeleton dialogue on the board with them. You ask them for help. You don't simply go to the board and just write the dialogue. You ask them to help you, right? And then we have A and B and you practice. And then here you can see in pink some options of the means of transportation they can use. So here, this is more help. This is more scaffolding for students who need more support or for whole groups who need more support. So you see, the original task in the course book already offered support, but I have to evaluate, I have to consider while I'm planning my classes if my students need even more support, right? And then, yes, that's what I wanted to show you. Oh, okay. Yeah, it's another slide. And then once they have the support and they rehearsed, they practiced that several times, I can make things a little bit more challenging. I can go to the board and, for example, start erasing some words. All right, they'll keep practicing. And then I go there and just erase this language. Okay, it's the same. We have a less helpful, let's say, a less complete dialogue. All right, when I do that, okay, so they have rehearsed that several times to say, okay, now you're ready for another level of challenge, right? And then we have to consider the stronger students. Remember my air quotes again, the stronger students as well. We have to challenge them, otherwise they'll get bored, right? Same task, work in pairs, ask and answer about a real or imaginary trip. I just give the functions. You're going to talk about where you went, how you got there, what you saw in places you visited, and the things you took with you. And, depending on the time you have, of course, it's impossible to do this all the time. You can have student A with the skeleton dialogue, right? And student B with the functions. And they can work together and they can achieve the same outcome. They can have the same outcome. If this is possible. I know it's a lot of preparation, it's a lot of time, but try to do it. I think, you would have fantastic results in your classes. So another things we can do to challenge the stronger students in the task, you add the challenge. You have to add more phrases to the conversation. So remember that the dialogue we had. So where did you go on your last vacation? I went to, how interesting, nice. Did you go to? Expand the conversation as much as you can. I'm running out of time as usual. Sorry, guys. I'll speed up a bit here. And here I have another challenge. I found this activity in the book about mixed ability classes, working with mixed ability classes, and I found it fantastic. And you're going to understand why there's a cup of coffee here. Yeah. Students have to expand a very simple dialogue. So I'm going to read this very simple dialogue. You're going to see it makes sense, but students can have a lot of fun with it if they expand it. So we have coffee. Yes. Sugar? Yes. How many? 1. Milk? No. Here. Thanks. It's a complete dialogue, right? And here I had this, my intonation helped provide the meaning, let's say, helped build the meaning of this dialogue. But if you give a dialogue like this to students, they can expand it. Would you like some coffee? Yes, please. Would you like some sugar in it? Oh, yes, thank you. How many spoons? Oh, just 1 spoon, thanks. Would you like some milk? And so on. And then they expand this dialogue. I think this is a wonderful challenge for students who are ready for it. Now we're getting to the end of the session. Some general tips for speaking tasks in general. Plan carefully. Remember, I said preparation and planning is very important when we have speaking tasks, but change the plan. It's like that another saying that we have about teaching, teach the students, not the plan. So if things go wrong, if it's a bad day for a speaking task, if students are restless, change your plans. Be flexible. Establish a relaxed atmosphere. Be careful with the thing of speak only English in class, this English only policy. You might end up having a tense atmosphere in your classes. So just be careful with that. Find room to tweak the task. So change the activities in your course books. If a speaking task proposed in the course book is too easy or too difficult for your students, tweak it, change it a little bit. Offer students choice. So the choice can be how they're going to work, if they're going to work in pairs or small groups, for example, or if they're going to do the order they're going to do the tasks. Students feel valued when they have choice. Be careful with accuracy and fluency. Sometimes you have to choose in some tasks. Say, okay, in this task, I'm going to focus on accuracy. Now I'm going to look at fluency. So we must have a balance. Don't be afraid of silence. I think we teachers want to feel silence all the time. And we end up speaking too much. Don't be afraid of silence in your classes. Maybe, there's silence in class, but there's a lot going on in our students' minds. Talk about yourself, share your experiences. You can start a speaking task about activities students did on their last vacation. Talk about your last vacation, but don't talk too much. I think we tend to talk too much. We have to keep teacher talking time low, right? And give feedback. Tell your students how they're doing, if they did well, areas for improvement, and encourage students to extend their turns to speak more. And finally, sorry guys, I'm really worried about time. This is the message that I usually end my sessions with. I love it because I think we have to change our teaching methods and approaches all the time. These are my references. And question time, if there's time for questions.
Sure, there is. Lots of positive feedback here in the chat, Viviane.
Oh, good.
Well done.
Thank you.
We have a question from Leila Aparecida Bispo dos Santos. She asks, is there any tip to work with large groups in which have some students with special need, such as autism?
That's a huge challenge. I have very little experience with students with special needs, I must confess. But I think, again, it's a matter of adapting the task. I think they must have a task, but you have to adapt it. The same way that you adapt all the other materials, everything else you're going to use to do in class, you have to adapt that as well, and provide the right level of challenge. I think this is the case in which if you have a more knowledgeable student, if this student has a more knowledgeable peer, I think they can work together and they can learn a lot from each other. I think this is also an interesting thing to do.
All right, Vivi. I'm just going to put here in the chat. We have a white paper talking about learning difficulties. So Leila, perhaps you will find
this is great.
Some good advices and ideas here.
Good.
Right?
Thank you, Katya.
One more question. Eliezer, how can we adapt for online classes?
I think that when we're talking about online classes, I think preparation time can be a bit longer because then you have to think of your breakout rooms, how you're going to organize your students in the breakout rooms, and also remember to enter the breakout rooms and monitor students because they're kind of all alone there and they might misbehave when they're all alone or not do the task at all. But once we, every time we monitor, my experience with online classes, or with groups, when I had to monitor groups, I kept my mic off, I kept the camera off. I tried to be, less, the least intrusive as possible, the least intrusive person I could be. So I think in terms of adaptation, you don't have to change a lot in terms of the tasks, but your monitoring has to be planned carefully.
Thanks, Vivi. No more questions. Now I believe it's already 5 o'clock.
Yes. Yes, it's 5:01.
I'm going to ask to place again the link for the feedback form.
Okay. These are my contacts, just in case you want to follow me on social media, if you want to send an email. These are my contacts, and this is the link for further information on Global Changer, if you want to learn more about it. And the form link is on the chat box. Yes, Katja?
Exactly. It's already there.
Good.
So we thank you very much, Viviane, once again. It's been a wonderful presentation full of practical advices and tips.
Thank you.
We got lots of positive feedback here in the
this is
chat.
good.
Yeah. And don't forget that tomorrow we will have one more webinar. It's going to be the last one at 3 p.m. with Herbert Porta.
Fantastic.
So thanks very much for your participation, dear teachers.
Thank you, teachers.
Thank you, Vivi, once again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.